Hello everyone, welcome back to another Stratagoy video. Ryan here in my, just by myself, hanging out, trying to catch us all up on the recent AOS 4th edition news that we've seen on Warhammer Community. It's been a little bit drier in the past week and a half than it had for the first two videos worth of content, so it'll be just me today instead of Jonas. Also, we've had a hard time getting our schedules together, but that's totally fine. And we're really kind of saving our energy for the upcoming announcement at one of the big conferences or game weekends. I think it might be like the Dallas Open or something like that, where they'll be revealing everything evidently that's in the launch box. So all the models, I'm assuming not all the rules, but enough to definitely sink our teeth into. So trying to just kind of get ahead of that on time. Anyway, before I jump into this, gonna try to keep it a little bit shorter today. Definitely no like 2.5 hour video or whatever. Don't forget to hit the like, share, and subscribe down in the comments or in the YouTube video itself, and then leave some comments and hit the Discord if you're feeling so inclined. All right, without further ado. So this time we're just going to be talking about kind of the same format as before, where we hit the models first, then some new rules, which is most of the content, and then the kind of scant Warscrolls that we actually ended up seeing this time around. It's kind of little bits and pieces here and there, so not too much to cover there. So should go quick. All right, so new models. There's only really the two that have been announced. It's the new prosecutors, which you see on the left here, and then the new Warplock Jazale's replacement. Both of these are replacements actually for pretty old models, especially of course the Warplock Jazale from the Skaven that's like metal if I'm not mistaken, kind of like the rest of the weapons teams. Technically the Warplock Jazale isn't a weapons team itself, it doesn't follow all the normal rules, but it was an artillery piece that came in like groups of 3. Who knows how they're going to implement it this time, but I do like the model. I have to be honest, and this goes for the prosecutor too, I guess. I'm not that impressed with the remake of almost any of the models we've seen thus far. I think they're fine, totally fine. But none of them are inspiring me to be like if I didn't play this army, I'd have to play it already. I do, however, play both of these armies, and actually, incidentally, did not collect any Jazales because I had a feeling when I started collecting that the metal models would get replaced sooner than later. So I didn't buy too many, but I did buy some, but not Jazales. So whatever I get in the launch box will be what I have. And I'm excited to have them. And then the prosecutors, gosh, I mean, they look fine. They look great. It's cool. I dig the flame stuff, just totally fine. But you better believe I'll still be using my old prosecutors. The new ones, if I'm not mistaken, don't have any hammers anymore. It's just the javelins. So, I built 2/3 of the 9, so I guess 6 of the 9 that I have as javelins anyway. And maybe I'll just snap the arms off and put some javelins on the other 3, or I don't know. And then, of course, if I get the launch box, which I'm planning on, I'm assuming there's at least 3 in that box. So definitely going to have a lot of prosecutors. I hope the rules are good. If not, I'm still going to play with them because I've always liked flying units anyway, so pretty psyched. But not necessarily because they're new models. I didn't find the old ones all that bad. So what do you guys think, though? Leave some comments down below and, weigh in, especially since we don't have Jonas here. So you guys can kind of be my surrogate Jonas for this video. And or he can leave some comments, I guess. All right, let's move on. So for some new rules, we've got battle tactics. We've got manifestations. We got faction terrain, which both of those last two actually came in the same article. So I'd say some big shakeups there, but it's only one article's worth, half an article's worth for each. And then we had Spearhead and Path to Glory, ... The reason I'm ... dotting it here is because as much as I'm actually quite excited about Spearhead, probably not Path to Glory, but we'll see. I just feel like I'll cover that in another video sometime. I don't know how interested Jonas is, so maybe that can be its own thing later on. Once we learn more about it, we've learned enough to definitely be interesting, but I just feel like we can kind of cordon that off as its own thing and focus on the, I guess you could say, more narrative or smaller format versions of Age of Sigmar later, especially considering they don't use a whole chunk of the rules. That said, I do have as example Warscrolls in here, the 2 Spearhead Warscrolls that we saw, because they said that they're likely very similar to the actual full game, the match play GHB rules, with a few notable distinctions. But we'll get into that later. Okay, so battle tactics is probably the juiciest thing, I guess. I've gone ahead and put an image of the 3 universal battle tactics on the screen, but we'll get to those in a minute. So, without going into too extreme detail about this stuff, just a few bullet points here, that the battle tactics we're about to be talking about are intended for match play and the GHB, which we've kind of always called match play the GHB, but I suppose this is distinguishing between, like when they talked about the modules article, they kind of said there's the GHB version of match play and there's just the core rules version of match play. So I think that's like First Blood or something like that. Anyway, I'm assuming most people will be playing with the GHB version, but in any case, it's got all 6 of the same universal battle tactics that are shared. Another thing they told us is the battle tome tactics are gone. This is a big hallelujah for a lot of people, and we already know that they've kind of reserved the right to take grand strats out of the game, at least temporarily. Or I should say they reserve the right to bring them back later, but they have taken them out of the game for at least the next GHB. So basically, all of those book versions of things that felt kind of haves and have-nots-y, if you want to put it that way, between certain armies that had really good ones and some armies that didn't. I'm thinking about Daughters of Cain and Zinj as 2 particularly good examples for battle tactics and grand strats, respectively. Those are gone, and so now we can just focus on the 6 universal battle tactics, of which we've seen 3, and then also as the 4th bullet point here says, the GHB has a total of 8 Grand Alliance battle tactics. That's 2 per alliance, so 2 for order, chaos, death, and then destruction, giving each player a total of 6 plus 2, so 8 in total in a given game. So definitely smaller than before. I mean, the average amount of battle tactics that the given book had, or I shouldn't say average, but the median or mode in this case also would be 6 that we saw in a book, plus the 8, I guess it was, that we saw in the original publication of most of the GHB, so that's 14. And then recently we got a 15th or 9th GHB one in the form of the Nullstone Adornment taking over an objective one. I forget what that's called. But anyway, so that's basically what we're working with. It's almost half as many battle tactics to work with, and right now we have no reason to think that they're going to expand the list. So basically, you're going to be thinking about these pretty hard for your list building. So let's take a look at them. All right, so as you can see, I highlighted the name here to know which one we're talking about. So seize the center. I'll just read the rule and then I'll read through my kind of notes I made. You complete this battle tactic at the end of your turn if 2 or more friendly units are within 3 inches of the center of the battlefield and are not in combat. Now, here's the notes that I had, and this is actually one that I took a lot of notes on in my prep document. But to play around this one, both for yourself and to deny it for your opponent, you'll kind of always want to have a unit in the center, even if there's no objective in the center, which kind of creates a n+1th objective, if you will. If you have 6 objectives on the field, now we got 7, assuming one of those 6 wasn't in the middle. That kind of deal. Because you're going to want to deny this, and by having, like, say, a tanky unit that's standing, like, basically on the 3-inch marker in the middle, you're keeping them from not only getting it, but also because they couldn't be in combat to qualify. And you got to have 2 or more friendly units, so pretty rough, and I think that's going to be a new move. Now, of course, it was always a move to kind of put your guys in the middle so you have the most flexibility for getting around, and the middle was always a pretty tactically advantageous place, but, my second point here was that we're going to pretty much need to pre-mark this center, and maybe with our old objective markers. Now, why do I say this? Because it's really hard, especially if you've got models and terrain all over the place, to know exactly what the center of the battlefield is so that you can then put a 3-inch radius, like mini objective, in the middle. So if I were playing this, I would have a 3-inch like marker out, ready to go, and put it square in the middle of the board and make sure it couldn't slide, because this one's really important. And it's the matter of if like it moves a little bit and you got to remeasure it, and someone in their previous turn intentionally stood so that you couldn't get this tactic, it's going to make a difference. I also said if the objective is like one of the battle tactic, or not battle tactic, but primary objectives is in the middle, then what you could try doing is layering the objective markers. So to come back to the old objective markers point, a lot of the current 6-inch radius objective markers that we put on the field have also have like a 3-inch marker that's kind of like drawn onto that objective, and so you could use that as your like 3-inch marker and just ignore the rest of the radius, the other 3 inches, the wider 3-inch radius that's wider with surface area, and just ignore it. That said, it might get confusing with an extra big objective on the field that isn't actually an objective. But then again, because the new objectives are a 40 millimeter center with plus 3 inches on them, they're very different size objectives, so you probably wouldn't be all that tempted to confuse them. That said, I think it's probably more ideal to have an actual just 3-inch objective marker that you place in the middle. And I hope someone who prints objective markers goes out there and like just adds one of those. That would be really nice to add one of those to every set you buy. Of course, you could just 3D print something or whatever, but I would rather it be in mousepad personally. So what I meant by layering them, by the way, is if there is an objective for that mission that needs to be in the middle, then considering that a 3-inch marker is smaller than the like 40 millimeter plus 3 inches, of course, implicitly, then what you would do is you'd put the new 40 millimeter plus 3-inch objective marker down, and then perfectly aligned with the center point on top of one another, you'd put another 3-inch marker on there to know. Because unfortunately, the center of a 40 millimeter plus 3-inch marker is not, that 40 millimeter base is not 3 inches. It's smaller than 3 inches. So unfortunately, that wouldn't do either. So now you have to know, and it's converting from millimeters to inches. So to be precise, you're really going to need another objective. I really don't like that they did this. I wish they had just said within 40 millimeters of the center, so that you know that you're on like one of those bases, and then it's just flexibly interchangeable. But no, they didn't do that, and now we're all going to be, I don't know, stuck in kind of a awkward point unless you really just love remeasuring what the exact center of the battlefield is. Another option, of course, is to whatever game mat you're using. Of course, this wouldn't work at tournaments unless all of a TO's mats they do this with all of them, is to permanently mark it on the thing, or even buy a mat that's printed that way. Or maybe it has lines so you know exactly where the center point is. But then again, you still don't know what 3 inches is off of that. And if there's a whole bunch of models, it's going to be tough to know exactly where that 3-inch marker is without disturbing the whole situation. So, and all you have to do is toe in on this, but of course you can't be in combat. So then it's a whole hot mess. I don't know what you guys think about this. My last point here was that hopefully battle plans will all avoid putting terrain in the center. And by that, I don't mean the old-fashioned way that like you go to a tournament and a TO tells you what to put on the center, or even worse, that your opponent just gets to freely set up all the terrain, which we don't allow at like Worlds kind of competitive level stuff, at least in my meta here. It's always given to us by the TO. But hopefully there isn't a single TO that would do that knowing that this mission exists, because you put a big piece of terrain right in the middle, you can't even get this. And then second, that the maps that GW has made for the missions, which we've already seen with the battle plan article that we had, hopefully they don't have a single piece of terrain that's in the middle. That would just be ridiculous. It would be the kind of thing that would need to get reprinted in FAQ, because it's just, why is that in there with this being one of only 6 universal battle tactics that's available? But anyway, that's my gripe. I think it's an easy battle tactic so long as your opponent's not playing around it. But of course, if you want to be in combat, then of course you want to be in combat. So you either have to kill, like, I mean, if your army wants to be in combat, you're wasting a whole turn doing this, or you have to have wiped out whatever's in the middle. And of course you have to have 2 units there, so it could be rough. Alright, let's move on. Take the flanks. You complete this battle tactic at the end of your turn if you have at least 1 friendly unit within 6 inches, and that's not wholly within, just within, of each short battlefield edge. So if you picture, they mean the ones that are further apart, because they're talking about short as in the edge itself is shorter. But these are the 2 objectives that are further apart, not closer together, which is a little maybe counterintuitive reading this. And none of those units are wholly within friendly territory. So they could be partially within friendly territory. That's interesting. And none of those units were set up this turn. All right. So it should be possible on the first turn as long as the setup, like being set up for your deployment, is not defined as being within the first turn itself, but is something like in this kind of weird pre the game, or it's like in its own thing. So as long as your deployment doesn't count as being part of the first turn, which it never really has, but just kind of thinking out for that possibility, then it would be possible on the first turn. Of course, you need to set up some units on the side, and they need to move outside of your objective. None of those units are wholly within friendly territory. I don't know if I said this right, but that means they could have a toe in your own territory, but just can't be wholly within. So all you got to do is kind of like barely step out. And then be also within 6 inches of the sides. Now, of course, I said this here too. It's better balanced against armies with teleports, as in compared to something like Surround and Destroy, which is the obvious comparison at this point in the end of 3rd edition. The armies that had teleports just had such a better advantage. But now, because all you got to do is kind of walk over the line, you should be fine. And so you don't really need teleports anymore, so it's better balanced so that those armies aren't benefiting too much. But, as I said in the second half of that sentence, it still benefits armies with faster units. So if you can get around, especially considering not only that you want to get over there, but then also make your way back into the middle. If you're playing a really slow army, like Nurgle maybe, or Fire Slayers, you're going to have some trouble with that unless they've got some new rules that let them speed up or something, teleport. I'd still say it's easier than Surround and Destroy for most armies. I mean, think about Surround and Destroy it had to be like 3 units, so this is only 2. They had to be, only 1 could be in your territory. You had to be wholly within 6 inches. And most of the time, we were talking about the short sides of the battlefield anyway. I don't know if there was ever really a time when it wasn't. Yeah, there might have been an exception in there, but sometimes because of the way your deployment zone was, you'd have a little bit more flexibility with which sides of the board you were choosing and how far away they were from the side that you set up on. But anyway, okay, so that one seems totally reasonable, right? Okay, moving on to Slay the Entourage. So pick a unit in the enemy general's regiment. You complete this battle tactic if that unit is destroyed this turn. Okay. Now, thinking about what you do to kind of keep people from doing this. So I said it incentivizes taking either only tanky units or just your general in that regiment. So what does that mean? Well, the general's regiment is one of your drops. It's the only drop we know for a fact every single player has to take because you have to take a general. And we know at this point that it can take 1 extra unit inside. Instead of just 3 units, it can take 4. I'm also assuming that anyone that's a War Master can also take 4, but we don't know that for a fact. Now, because this battle tactic exists, now we're seeing some interplay with list building. Because now you're like, well, I was going to take some screens, and I was thinking about doing a 1-drop by putting like some crazy elite army with just 1 hero, maybe, in this general's regiment. But now I'm like, well, I don't know. I don't know if I want to put those screens in there because they're just going to get wiped out. So you're like, well, maybe I should put tankier units, or maybe I should put no units and just have my general in there. So I'm basically, he's functionally just acting like a drop that is like an auxiliary unit, except it won't give battle tactics to your opponent. I'm sorry, not battle tactics, command points every battle round by you having more auxiliary units. So but otherwise it's more or less functioning that way. My second bullet point was it's assuming that the general counts as being in his own regiment. I don't know why he wouldn't, but so that means this is always going to be an option if that's how you interpret it, which is basically like saying kill the warlord or whatever. And then we're not really sure thus far what other benefits one is gaining from being in the general's regiment, like a unit is gaining. So at this point, we don't really know. But if you, I could see a world where they really incentivize being in that general's regiment. Um, and then you can, you're like, well, maybe I do want to put a less tanky unit in there, or I do want to put some really good units, but I'm also worried that that's giving them more options for this battle tactic. I correct myself. I think we did see one thing that had to do with the current GHBs, like the coming GHBs, like special rules, and it was like they get an extra benefit. One of the units in that regiment, like to give them a. It was, if I'm not mistaken, it had something to do with making it so that it was harder to hit the general or something like that, or hit that unit. It was like a bodyguard type rule. That was one of the 3 things you could choose after deploying or after seeing your opponent's list or something. But anyway, so you by choosing to take no units in that unit that regiment, then you're giving up that ability. So obviously there is some amount of interplay, but otherwise we haven't seen any other rules. Okay, so moving on, a little bit about these just in general. Like I said, we're doing 2 Grand Alliance battle tactics, and we've seen 1 order, 1 chaos, 1 death, and 1 destruction. That's the order we're going to go in here. We're only seeing 1 of 2 for each of them. So that means in combination with the 3 out of 6 universal traits we've seen exactly half of what's available in the game and evenly distributed between all 4 Grand Alliances. So I guess that's kind of cool. Okay, Reclaim the Realms. This is the order battle tactic, 1 of 2. You complete this battle tactic at the end of your turn if there are 1 or more friendly units wholly within each quarter of the battlefield and more than 6 inches from all enemy units. And as I pointed out here, this is, I think, almost word for word the same as the current Stormcast pity tactic that wasn't originally printed in their book but was FAQ'd with a battle scroll in because Stormcast was having such a rough time with battle tactics, considering they were like one of the 2 first books and they had just really bad ones, mostly. And now this one works very well for Stormcast, or at least current Stormcast, because Stormcast has a number of fast units, B, the ability to deep strike with the Signs of the Storm ability, and to basically anywhere you want on the battlefield. And you're incentivized to do so for a lot of, especially their shooting units and maybe units that get charge bonuses when they land. C, they have a lot of teleporters and translocation, even if you don't have a teleporter. So Stormcast could do this quite easily, but it's going to really be dependent for the other order armies, because now it's not just a Stormcast thing, on how mobile that army is, like with not only teleports but deep striking, and then just general movement characteristics. So Fyreslayers, in my opinion, is going to have it the worst unless it speeds up for some reason, or they get like mini Droth Cavalry or something. I mean, they do have a deep strike they can do in the current rules with Rune Smiter on foot, but that said, it's a once per game thing, and the unit has to come with him. So to be wholly within the territory, to do it correctly and have both of those 2 units like be in separate quarters, they'd have to land straddling the quarter line. And then maybe that's not advantageous for your positioning with the whole point of the deep strike. And then you still have to get 2 other quarters. So let's say one of them is in your territory, so that's easy. But then you still have another one you have to get. So then you have to bring another Rune Smiter to do it, or take an ally that can get over there. Who knows how list building is going to look and what the rules are going to look like. But I'm imagining that's pretty difficult for Fyreslayers. I also said for maybe for certain cities builds, Seraphon and Lumineth builds, I could see this also being rough. Like the Emetrica Lumineth builds as they currently are not that mobile, so you're incentivized to always take like a Cav unit or like a Spirit of the Wind or something. Seraphon, if they're playing like a slower build that's less cavalry oriented and more castle oriented. Same with cities. Any castle army just doesn't like to spread out that much. It's just by definition rough. Obviously things like Ideneth and Sylvaneth are going to be all right, I think, but like I don't know. I actually think this is one of the hardest ones, depending on what your army is. And the fact that you need to be outside of 6 inches is also rough. Now, granted, a lot of units that are teleporting or deep striking have to be outside 9 by default. But then there's the counter movement shenanigans that we've got, like counter charge and all kinds of other stuff that could easily set a unit within 6 inches of this one that you spent all this time trying to get over there. So pretty rough. You could try to, of course, charge in and kill a unit and then be an island unto yourself outside of 6 inches. But I personally think this is the hardest battle tactic we've seen thus far, including the ones I'm about to talk about. But we'll see. Okay. Chaos has Ordained Charge. Pick an objective controlled by your opponent. You complete this battle tactic at the end of your turn if 2 or more friendly units charged this turn, 1 or more of those units are contesting that objective, and you control that objective. This is just a layup of a battle tactic. This is like should have been a core one. I mean, we haven't seen what the other 3 are, but like pretty easy. Like, I'm going to try to play devil's advocate against myself, but like it's so flexible. I mean, Nurgle, I said, is probably the hardest to get this, but it means it just needs to shoot for later in the game, as in like just wait till you get closer and then you'll go charge with 2 units and take over an objective. You know, it's not that hard. I mean, it's incentivizing you. It's just like asking you to do more of the stuff that you already wanted to be doing anyway. Whereas like the order one, I don't know that you want to put 4 units, spread them all the way across the board, having them be wholly outside of 6 inches from enemy units, you know, or if you even have the capability. But this is asking you to do something you already wanted to do, even for slow armies. I said it's particularly easy for cavalry armies that are either tanky or good in combat, because obviously there's some risk of sending a model in. I was thinking about Tzeentch, like throwing some random unit that's not good in combat in, like a wizard of yours. Like, it's kind of a desperate move at that point, and then maybe he dies or whatever. Maybe then you're not controlling an objective. But for armies that are good at staying alive and are fast, you know, you're good. All right, let's move on. Death has Marked for the Grave. Pick a non-hero enemy unit that has not had any models slain this battle. If there are no non-hero enemy units on the battlefield, you can pick an enemy unit, just like any enemy unit. And you complete this battle tactic if, at the end of the turn, that unit is destroyed. I said this is pretty easy. Now, some general things here. It disincentivizes picking off single models from units, because you need to have some choices for a unit that hasn't had any models slain this battle. Now that brings me to my second point. I'm curious how this works with recursion. I'm assuming if a model dies and someone brings a model back, it still counts as having had models slain this battle. But again, just looking out for possible technicalities. So then, if it didn't work like that, if it didn't count as slain, then for that death army, they might actually be kind of like psyched that you brought that model back in a weird moment, you know, but that's a niche case. I said it's a pretty easy tactic so long as you can deal damage, so like keep in mind that's not necessarily what all death armies are meant to do. Like some chaff type unit is going to have a hard time doing that, and then of course you've got to be able to get to the units that haven't had any models slain. Now, I said a counterplay is to use screens if you're the other player that's trying to kind of turn this a battle tactic off as an option for the death player, is to use your screens only for objective control and not up front as actually screens. And what I mean by that is, like, that's an easy unit to kill, and you might not want to give someone an easy battle tactic by just setting up a super easy unit to take out. But otherwise, I think it's pretty straightforward. Let's move on to the last one. Destruction, time to get stuck in. Pick 3 friendly units that are not in combat and are wholly within friendly territory. You complete this battle tactic at the end of your turn if each of those units is wholly outside your territory, so not even a little bit touching your territory, and used a fight ability this turn. I think this is actually way harder than I've heard other people talking about. I say it's the second hardest we've seen. It's highly dependent on where your friendly territory ends, and or how much extreme mobility exists in destruction. So, for example, Ironjawz probably has it the best if they keep Mighty Destroyers as it more or less works now. They can fly across the board better than anyone, pretty much, for an alpha melee. It's also way better if Kragnos still gives a 3d6 inch charge. But it's particularly rough for Trogs, regular Ogres, Footgits, maybe even Gargants. Now, why? Think about how big those pie plate Gargant bases are. They're not the full pie plate, but they're the next one down. Think about how big those bases are. You had to have 3 of them. They don't have that many units often in that army, and they're not the fastest army, at least traditionally. The whole base has to have not been like even slightly outside of your territory. Then they have to move And then all 3 whole units have to make a charge. And once you've committed to getting outside of your territory, you're probably never going to have a chance to do this one again. Like, it just depends on if you can get across the battlefield. And your opponent can pretty easily set it out by trying not to give you that option. Let's say your 3 Gargants or something similar, like Beastclaw, Raider, cows, are spread relatively evenly across the battlefield. Then they just deploy or move accordingly. So, like, say they do go advance up to take some objectives, but they just go in such a way that they lean towards one side where one of those units is just not going to get in, and you don't have maybe a backup option for your 3rd unit to get them over there. I just think this is a really rough one, but maybe someone knows something that I'm not thinking about here. It really depends on what we see with the rules, but as the armies currently exist, I think this is like a must-take Kragnos kind of thing. And maybe don't ever take Trogs. I don't ever see a world where Trogs are getting this, unless someone else alphas them. But then it could also be turned off by the opponent getting you in combat, even if you were staying in friendly territory. And then you can't do it. So I don't know, whatever. Okay. So moving on to manifestations. I'm going to read what's in the right-hand column here, and then we can talk about, like, what's kind of summarize what's on the left. I don't know if we need to go through all of it. Basically, the big points are that we have had it confirmed that we get 1 spell, 1 prayer, and 1 manifestation lore per player, period. Now, people, this is not like you have to choose maybe a manifestation lore instead of taking a spell lore. You just get it. But people have talked this into the ground already, that it could be a extra feel bad for armies that don't have access to wizards or priests to be able to bring those kinds of things, the incantations or endless spells. I still think it's pretty cool. I mean, obviously it's forcing people to if they want to get the most out of their free stuff in their army, to have extra models. If they didn't already have all these, and then you have to bring them, so you have to bring them to the tournament. Maybe you only bring 1 because you're like, I'm never going to summon these other ones, but maybe, who knows? We don't know how like kind of necessary they're going to be. We also don't know if there's ways to kit out your army so you can take multiples of these things. So, like, you could choose from 2 manifestation lores, or, like, as we'll see in a sec, the Incarnate, and then some other stuff, like some other endless spells. Who knows? But we'll find out soon enough, I guess. And faction-specific manifestations will replace your universal option if you only get 1 of each type. So it's just like spells. If you want to take a faction lore, that would replace, I guess, like a generic spell lore, if that exists. We don't even know yet, I don't think. As everyone knows, these are going to be grouped as in, like, if you take a manifestation lore, it comes with 3 to 4 endless spells, depending on how they grouped them. The Forbidden Power ones come as a group of 4 because that's how they're sold, but then the rest of the original Malign Sorcery ones are coming in either groups of 3 or 4. And they're also split further into moving or static, which is like what we're seeing over there on the left-hand side. I don't really want to go in too much detail about this, but basically some big things is that the manifestations can now be destroyed and damaged. Like, they have health characteristics, which we're going to see in a second. They can now shoot and fight just like anything else. They can use core abilities, but they can't use commands or friendly abilities unless it says otherwise. They can't contest and control objectives, these kinds of things. And then by splitting them into moving, which is like moving manifestations, which is like predatory endless spells as they currently are, kinda, and then static is they basically alter what the setup range looks like having to be set up outside of 9, whether you can move within combat range of them or not, these kinds of things, whether you can fight with them, that kind of stuff. I mean, I think actually you can fight against all of them, but whether they can fight, that kind of thing, whether they have to make charges, that kind of stuff. Anyway, that's kind of the basic gist of what's going on here. Let's take a look at an example Warscroll. So here's Quicksilver Swords. It's got 6 health, a 5+ save. So that means if you don't have rend, we're talking about needing to get 9 to hit and to wound rolls with 1 damage, successfully go through the whole sequence on average to knock this thing out. Because a 5-up save is functionally adding 50% more health absorption, wounds absorption. It moves 8 inches, kind of like the standard flying, and you'll see it does have fly on the keywords down below, in addition to a 6+ ward. So that's also bumping up the health absorption that I just mentioned. But the 8-inch movement is what we are used to seeing with these kinds of endless spells. And then as a banishment characteristic, now, Honest Wargamer Rob said that he felt like the banishment characteristic was going to be the same as the casting value. I'm not 100% sure that's true, because banishment is the opposite of casting. But then again, nowhere on this Warscroll does it say how much it costs to cast. I'm still kind of holding out hope that these two numbers are different, so that they have a dial to play with to say something's either really hard to put on the table but easy to get rid of, or vice versa. But at this moment, we have no reason to think that there's a casting value apart from the banishment value, other than that banishment is different than casting. It could be that when you take that lore, they also have a new dial that says, like maybe in the pitch battle profiles, how much the casting value is, and they bump that up and down as time goes on. Who knows? Or that something about the manifestation lore itself has a rule about what the casting values are. Anyway, this is basically just a unit you put on the table that starts 9 inches outside of your opponent's units when you set it up, and can't move but can charge that turn. It can't make a normal move. But when it gets in combat, it has 12 attacks at 3s, 3s, -1, 1. I'm going to keep saying -1 because I just think it's easier to know what we're talking about there. And then does crit mortals, which again we don't know for a fact, but on 6s to hit should probably do what the damage characteristic says. It certainly isn't going to do any less than 1, so it's at least 1. And then, as before, ward rolls can't be made against the damage points inflicted by this manifestation's attacks. So that's kind of cool. It's basically what it does now, but it used to do mortal wounds. It's quite a lot of damage. It's doing, I think, on average, 4 wounds at a -1 save. Like, that's pre-save, but then you have to adjust that based on the save, and then doing 2 mortal wounds on average. So, not bad. So, that's what a predatory or moving endless spell looks like now. Manifestation, maybe I should say. And here's an example with Prismatic Palisade of what a static version would look like. Also, it's 8 health and a 4-up save, so doing a wounds characteristic, like an absorption value there, not taking into account its ward. It takes an average of 16 non-rend attacks going through with 1 damage each to get rid of this thing. But you can also banish it, so again, that's the point, is we have more than just the normal banishment rolls that you needed a wizard for. Now you can just go attack the thing and get rid of it, which is nice. As you'll see, it has no movement characteristic. So what's the point of this one? Well, this is a wall that gets set up, and it can't be targeted. So it itself cannot be targeted by shooting attacks. In addition, a unit cannot be targeted by shooting attacks if it's impossible to draw a straight line from a model in the attacking unit to a model in the target unit without the line passing across. And that would go for enemy units and friendly units. So they block each other out. Anyone that has this model knows that it's big, but it's not big enough to block like a big unit. And it's just a line being drawn across it. So it's as if it goes infinitely high. So even if your model is taller than the wall itself, it's totally fine. But I'm thinking this is best for like a small foot hero, because its base is smaller. It has a better chance of, even if your opponent starts to kind of try to flank this model, it has a better chance of still being able to see it. Or not see it, I mean. Okay, moving on to faction terrain. Faction terrain basically has a similar kind of change that happened with regards to its health characteristic and a save. So this is, as you can see on the screen here, we've got an example of the Magmic Battle Forge that has 8 health, 3-up save. So if we're doing the same kind of calculation, we're looking at 3 times the health of no rend. That's how many to hit and wound rolls you'd have to successfully get through with a 1 damage thing. So 24. It's quite a lot, but obviously it's not. It's way easier to get rid of than it once was, because the only thing that could really get rid of it before was a a monster doing a monstrous rampage, a smash to rubble, but even that didn't. I can't remember if it removed the actual piece off the board or if it just turned off its abilities. I feel like it just turned off its abilities, and I think this removes the whole thing. You can see here that they said that it actually has some universal terrain abilities too, like cover, impassable, and obscuring. But we'll come. We don't need to go through the rules of what this does. It's more or less doing something similar to what the Magma Battleforge already did. That's something we could cover when we talk about Fire Slayers. But the big things that have changed, it does have a ward too, if I'm not mistaken, but I had to cut that off when trying to squeeze it on the screen here. This is an interesting news piece, some of them even have move and fight, some faction terrain pieces. So I'm assuming that might be like the Shrine Luminor for Lumineth because it floats, or maybe the Gloomtide Shipwreck for Ideneth because it's like ghostly. So maybe that's a thing. I could also see, as far as moving, maybe like a new KO faction terrain piece if they're going to make some new ones. Because there really aren't that many options that seem to be great for especially moving. So mentioning that this is a new thing that some terrain pieces can do makes me think they might be returning to making faction terrain. But maybe that's just hopium, or for people that don't like it, I think Jonas isn't a big fan, some bad news. As far as fighting, there are a number that do mortal wounds if you get too close to them. So I'm imagining maybe even the Awakened Wildwoods that we're about to talk about, or maybe like the Gnarl Pit or whatever it's called, like the new Ogre Maw Pit, I guess that's what it's called, or something similar, something that seems like it's got some teeth. I could see that being a thing. Now, the Sylvaneth one, for our big Sylvaneth fan base out there, I'm sure you guys have already broken this one down, but this is the spell that I suppose everyone knows, all Sylvaneth heroes know. I'm pretty sure that's what they said. And it kind of replaces Verdant Blessing or whatever it was called before. Interestingly, it's Tree Song, which means, I guess, old Tree Song doing extra rend, I think it was, around trees. A given tree is no longer a thing, maybe. But anyway, it's just a spell that is unlimited. It's our first unlimited spell we've seen, which means that any number of different wizards can cast this if they know the spell. So like if you've got 6 wizards in your army, you could try to cast it 6 times. What it's basically saying is you have 2 different conditions. If you have fewer than 3 Awakened Wildwoods on the battlefield, and currently we don't know how you create them other than this spell, assuming that the rules are all reset, and we don't want to assume that anything is still in the game that previously wasn't, or previously was, I mean. But anyway, if there's 3 or fewer than 3, you can set up a whole Awakened Wildwood. I'm assuming it's all 3 pieces. Maybe you can even do smaller, who knows. Wholly within 18 inches of the caster and more than 3 inches away from all enemy units, objectives, and other terrain features. If I'm not mistaken, that's actually quite more generous than what it used to be. I'm not 100% sure. But in any case, if you have exactly 3, now, it doesn't say 3 or more, and this is a notable thing because it kind of by implication means that there is no version of the world where you'll ever have more than 3 trees, which I guess is good for people that own exactly 3 full sets, bad for people that went ham on buying them unless they just really like those models, and then who knows if they're going to keep the overgrown rule. But anyway, if there are exactly 3, then you get to heal all of them. There's no range to this, just all the ones on the battlefield, a flat 3 wounds, which we don't know how many wounds each of them has. Let's say it's the same as the Battleforge, then they each got 8, and then maybe we're lucky and they have a 3-up save instead of a worse save. Then, that's decent. Who knows if there's another way to heal your woods as well, as the game goes on. But obviously, if your opponent just sits next to those woods trying to turn them off for teleporting to assuming that that's how they still work, and then is also attacking them just because why not, that's pretty rough. But then of course you can set up new ones, but and fortunately they only have to be outside of 3 of enemy units. I'm assuming you're going to start, if they start trying to lock you out enough, you're going to only set up like a small piece, because that might be all that you can fit, wholly within 18 of your caster and more than 3 inches. So who knows if there's any other way to make trees, but at the moment, that does seem a little more restrictive than what we're used to. But it's an indication of how that's going to work for an army that's very dependent on their trees. Also, for Skaven Gnawholes, I'm hoping there's a way to keep making new Gnawholes. either with a spell or like a unit that digs tunnels or something. Okay, let's take a look at some Warscrolls. The only Warscrolls we really got are examples from Spearhead, which is why they look different. Like you'll notice that the like normal circle we see is more of a shield here. Still's got health, move, save, and control values. And then the rest of the Warscroll looks pretty normal, except that it's horizontal instead of vertical. It's got this like kind of recycling symbol up in the upper right-hand corner, which has to do with, in Spearhead, being able to bring a unit back once it's dead, because not all the boxes have equal value worth of things. So they're basically saying you buy the box and then you can bring that unit back once it goes away. So you functionally have 2 times, but they can never be on the board at the same time, that kind of thing. But what I'm really interested in here is what they said about how this relates to the actual full AOS version of the unit. And from what they said, it seems to be that end of any turn ability that we see here, where you can return D3 slain models to this unit, which is basically just the same thing as the end of the Battle Shock, which is functionally into the turn anyway, and Battle Shock's gone, so, there we go. That's staying, supposedly. The melee profile is supposedly exactly the same for the full version of the game, except they also have, what's it called, the crit auto wound. So I broke this down in the right-hand column. It's basically the same profile as the spear profile of what we currently have. There were 2 profiles. The spears had more range, which you didn't really need to go for because they also gave you +1 inch range for every 10 models you had in a Skaven unit as a battle trait. So you pretty much always went with the better to hit and wound profile, which is 4s and 4s instead of currently 5s and 4s, and they flipped them on this one. And then gained the auto wound. Now, what's interesting is I'm glad they flipped them, because with an auto wound ability, if you do the math on it, it has a much bigger impact if the wound roll was the worse of the 2 than the other way around, because by making it so that every once in a while on a 6 to hit you auto wound, it goes from being, like in this case, a 2 out of 6 chance of wounding to a 6 out of 6. So way better. So it improves the output actually by 67%. Even considering that you only get those crit hits once in a blue moon, which is pretty good, and especially considering they have double attacks now. Yeah, and you'll also notice that the Spearhead version doesn't have command models, but we know they're going to have a full set because we've seen the kit. All right, moving on to the Magister on disc for Tzeentch. This is a weird one. It's our first example of a cavalry unit we've seen thus far, assuming that stays on the Warscroll. He lost 2 inches of movement, but the rest is pretty similar. I wrote down the changes here. The Rider's melee got 8 times better. It used to be 1 attack at 4s and 4s, 1 damage. So on average, before taking a save into account, was only doing a quarter of a wound. Now he's doing 2 on average before rend. So that's a huge improvement, but then again, you're probably not trying to fight with this guy a whole lot. The shooting attack didn't change at all, which is once again further proof that they didn't necessarily cut shooting ranges down, but it is what it is. And the disc itself, you know what? I wrote here that it got more consistent with damage. Oh, it got less consistent. It got more swingy. I think that's a typo. I think it used to be a flat 2 and now is D3. So my excuses. It's the other way around. My apologies, I mean. The thing that's the least clear about this is exactly what's going on with the match play version of his spell situation, because they kind of said, like, they called it Bolt of Tzeentch is like a lore spell that he's going to know, but I don't know why they said he knows that, because it's not the same thing as Bolt of Change. Maybe that's a typo. And then Bolt of Change was always his Warscroll spell, but they said he doesn't know it anymore. Who knows what's going on, but what we're seeing on this Warscroll is basically some combination of his old spell and that of the Zongor Shaman. I wouldn't concern myself too much with it, because there's a good chance this spell won't even be one he knows in the actual game. But this is an example of what magic will look like on a unit in Spearhead. So, cool. You'll have one Zangor unit in your Spearhead, and that's it. So he's bringing occasionally one model to that Zangor's unit back, which is not that impressive. I'd much rather him be creating Chaos Spawns, but who knows what that's going to look like. Okay. And then the closest thing we got to more Warscrolls was just this Ruination Chamber ability, which is confusing because it says once per turn for your army. So that just means let's say you have multiple units that have this ability, have access to it. You can only choose it once per turn for an army, your whole army, not per unit. And then it's a reaction to this unit being picked as the target of a non-core ability. So here we see some interaction with the core keyword. He makes a quote-unquote resistance roll on a d6 on a 4+. It has no effect on this unit. So this is better than a spell ignore because it's because we know that magic is a non-core thing. So it's including magic, but it's also including all kinds of other things. Interestingly, the funny thing is I think previously he would have actually ignored the effects of the endless spell because that was a spell and then counted for a spell ignore. But now I'm pretty sure their abilities count as core abilities because most of their abilities are just fighting abilities or shooting abilities if they have them. So if what's it called, Quicksilver Swords comes and tries to fight with you, then pretty sure that's just a regular fight ability and that's core. So now you are actually vulnerable to that. But it would also mean that Warscroll abilities that are implicitly not core he'd be able to shrug these. So that's kind of cool. The thing I don't get is that we're talking about the Ruination Chamber as though it's it's like everything that's coming out now. Like all the new models probably in the launch box are Ruination Chamber. But then they also talked about it like it's on his Warscroll, which we haven't seen the Warscroll yet. And so the question is, well, is this an ability that's a battle trait for Stormcast, that if you have the Ruination keyword, you get this? But they already showed us, supposedly, literally all of the battle traits for Stormcast. So I'm going to assume it's not. So is it some other type of enhancement? What is it? I would have lumped those in with battle traits formerly, I think. And then there's the question of, well, is this kind of like what Lumineth was like with their book before the 3rd edition book, or I guess all their books before the 3rd edition book, where Scenari units, Venari units had like special rules as battle traits that weren't on the Warscroll? Or is every single Ruination model going to have this rule written as a unique, well, not unique, but an ability on their Warscroll? I don't know. I'm kind of confused because we didn't actually see the Warscroll, and it doesn't seem that great if only one of your units per turn gets to do this. I don't know. Is that all that Ruination means? I don't know. We'll have to see. But a 4+ ability ignore, I guess, is pretty cool. And then their passive ability that we're assuming is on the Warscroll, it says it adds 1 to the number. It does actually say prosecutors in the flavor text, whereas the other one does not. It adds 1 to the number dice rolled when making charge rolls to a max of 3. Pretty cool, because it's still the 3d6 charge rule that they had before, but now we know that because there's no maximum charge that you can make, that most units just roll 2d6 for a charge ability. This one's adding 1 to that ability. So perhaps there's even more modularity with this, where they could have a unit that has subtract 1 from dice rolled because they're particularly bad at charging or unreliable. Or it might say +2, who knows, to a max of 3. Or maybe some units get to roll 3d6, and then if they had an ability like this, it would push it to 4. Who knows? But it definitely adds a little bit more granularity for adjusting it. And then our last thing is not really a thing. They showed us even less here. This is the little snippet for the Warblock Jezzails. It basically just said, if this unit has not used a move ability this turn, so including all of the command things that are move abilities, and was not set up this turn, which is not previously on the equivalent of this rule before, add 1 to hit rolls for this unit's shooting attacks for the rest of the turn. Okay, we don't know what the range is, but let's assume it's the same as the engineer, because he has some synergy with these guys. Then maybe it's a 30-inch range. I think he had 30-inch, or maybe it was 24. But in any case, it's long enough. I'm forgetting off the top of my head what he had. But anyway, they did get +1. They told us a little bit about their shooting profile without actually letting us see it. So we know that it has +1 attack, so that's cool. So they're doing 2 attacks now. They didn't tell us what the to hit was, but they did tell us everything else. It was formerly or currently is 3+. So, excuse me, I'm assuming it might still be a 3-up. That said, that's a pretty good profile for a Skaven unit. I wouldn't be shocked if they made it 4-up. But now you're getting a +1 to hit if it's not. It also has that wording for not being set up, so that's changed. But they didn't say anything about it retaining. It does 2 mortal wounds on 6s to hit. That's why I have a question mark here. So that was one of the things that made them more comparable with what long strikes currently are. In fact, for when they have the same amount of points for a unit of Jadales with the long strikes, they actually had the same expected value, more or less. There was a very similar amount of output, but then they were restricted to being artillery, which is one of my last point here. But before I get to that, they no longer have +1 to save versus missile attacks, evidently, because that seemed to come from their the same rule that gave them the move thing. But maybe because this is a your shooting phase thing, there's a second rule that has to do with the shield thing that they're setting it up on that will still give that. So maybe that's still there. But my point about them not being artillery anymore, which I'm assuming they won't, because it never really made sense anyway that they counted as artillery, and plus we know artillery are gone, but maybe there's not going to be that same kind of limitation where you can only take a max of 4 iterations of these things, groups of 3 as it were. Maybe that's been balanced out because if the mortal wounds are gone, which again I don't know, but if the mortal wounds are gone, then but they have +1 attack, and then you could take as many as you want. Maybe that's like a thing. And then we do know that they get buffed for being able to snipe out heroes with the Warlock Engineer. So we'll have to see. Okay, that's it, guys. That's the video. Kept it definitely shorter this time. Hope you guys enjoyed it. It's just my thoughts. Let me know what you think down below. We're going to try to get some content out for the launch box review, or the launch box, kind of like reveal, and we'll definitely get Jonas on that one. So anyway, in the meantime, guys, thank you so much again. Let us know what you thought of this video in the comments and in the Discord. And until the next time, Ryan out.